My name's Kathy Cesiri. I have 2 grown homeschoolers, and I write books of science technology projects, and this is my video studio where I've been doing workshops this summer for libraries and stuff, and I'm up in Saratoga. And I'm not seeing anybody else heading our way, so why don't you, our panelists can start introducing themselves. Why don't we start with Mike?
Okay, I'm Mike Jones, and I'm a dad of 2 that we homeschooled all the way through to college. They're now 21 and 25, and I live just north of Albany, between Albany and Saratoga.
And Rick?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Rick from California in San Jose. Kathy and I actually met at Maker Faire in New York, so we've both been involved in the maker movement for a long time, so hence my background here. So I've written a couple books for Make, a lot of articles, been involved in Maker Faire for a lot of years, and now my job as a public school teacher has combined with my love of making, and I teach making at our K-8 school here in town. It's a kindergarten through eighth grade school. And now I'm doing it virtually. Of course, California is mostly online now. And so today I wrangled, let's see, 3rd grade, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then 4th grade and 2nd grade today. So that's kind of my life, teaching making over Zoom, and it's been a lot of fun. As far as homeschooling, I guess that was your question, how we connect to homeschooling. I have a son who's 17 and a daughter who's 20, and we've homeschooled them as well from the very beginning all the way through college. Both my kids are in college. My daughter's at the university, never went to high school actually. I guess some might say we unschooled. And my son is at the community college. So he went to a couple years of public high school because he wanted to kind of try it out. And then he decided to move on to the community college after that. So here in California. So yeah, we weren't necessarily expecting to homeschool, but it's been a great journey. And I'm excited to talk about it with some other homeschool dads and you know, encourage other people to consider it as a path. So I kind of have a unique perspective as public school teacher. It's my 28th year of teaching, but then also homeschooling our own kids. So that's me.
Okay, and Todd?
Sure. Todd Thomas, currently in Rhode Island here. I also have a Maker Faire background, and I've actually done curated large exhibits at Maker Faire. And our whole family has kind of been involved with this. And I also do a maker and manufacturing incubator here in Rhode Island as well. So I get a lot of that too. So my background is we've got 4 kids, one of which graduated RPI at 20. The other one went into UNH at 18 with a year's worth of college already in her books, and she can graduate at a normal schedule with 2 degrees, 2 full bachelor's degrees. And I've got a child who's a rising junior, and then another child who is a rising 8th grader. Now the girls homeschooled since like 1st grade, or I think just after 1st grade, and the boys knew nothing but homeschooling. But the last 2 years, we've actually not been homeschooling the boys because our life actually got a little bit too chaotic. My wife is actually in a PhD program, teaching at 2 universities, and I was working full-time doing a large hospital construction management. So you know, we selected to stop homeschooling for a little while. Also, we had some issues with the boys in terms of, you know, how much they wanted to do it. Then I could talk a little bit more about the boy in high school who's at a state charter school that they work a job 2 days a week, and they also then do classwork 3 days a week. And then also all of our kids have special needs as well, so I can address some of those things.
All right, so this is fairly new to our family. My wife is she's an educator, so she was a teacher previous to us having children. My oldest is 11, so she took about 9 years off to just be with the children, and we've always kind of been playing with the idea of homeschooling. We ended up sending them to public school, to the Albany schools. We have a public Montessori here, so we sent them to the Montessori, and we had a fairly decent experience there. It was, still had to teach the New York State curriculum, and which was a little bit disappointing. We did opt them out of testing, and things like that. But then she ended up getting a job at a private Montessori here, Woodland Hill, about 2 years ago. And then this COVID thing hit in the spring, or winter, and she went through some of that. The kids kind of disengaged from the remote learning. It was completely different than the experience that they had in the school, which up to that point was decent. And at this point, we've run into a situation where we wanted the kids to stay home for this school year, but my wife was being asked to also go into the class to both teach remotely and in person. So we decided to just cut our losses and, so to speak, and try homeschooling / we're also exploring unschooling at this point. So it's kind of like the backstory to why I'm here. So like, I guess I don't have any really reservations about doing it this way. I'm pretty much a non-traditionalist in terms of like most aspects of life, but what I'm most concerned about are the New York State standards and things that you have to meet, or reports that you have to submit. And I know a couple of you had said you're from New York, so
Yeah.
tell me a little bit of experience.
So
Yeah, a little bit about your experiences in regards to having to submit reports and do testing through the state.
yeah, I'm interested to hear more about the New York perspective as well. Because I can kind of address California and what involves there, and maybe we'll pull in more California listeners, which would be pretty cool. But you guys are all kind of the experts on how it works in New York, so I'm excited to hear.
Me and Mike, Todd's in Rhode Island, so, and yeah, it's different in every state.
Todd's in Rhode Island. Yeah, sorry about that.
But he's got a Troy connection. But yeah, so I've been doing some webinars about New York State regulations. If you go to my website, kathysasiri.com, I have articles that walk you through the paperwork and, when you have to submit the IHIP if you haven't done that already, and the quarterly reports. My experience, and I homeschooled 2 kids, K through 12, was that, once I did it once and got over the initial confusion and terror and all that, I made up my own form on my computer, and I just updated it for every quarter and every year, and I just copied from one kid to the other because we did a lot of teaching together. My kids are 3 years apart, and they were good about working together, so we would study, everything pretty much except for math. They studied together, and then I just asked them to do things at different levels in terms of reports or, depth of understanding, or how much time they would spend with a topic. But the paperwork really was, an hour once every 3 months. So it's not burdensome. You have an 11-year-old, you have another one as well?
And a 9-year-old.
Yeah, so what grades are they? Because that determines the testing.
They would be going into 4th and 6th.
Okay. And I assume they took some kind of standardized tests last year, perhaps, or maybe not in the Montessori school?
Not in the Montessori school, no.
Okay. So up until 5th grade in New York State, you can just write a narrative instead of having to test any kind of test at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrative is just one sentence that says, you know, my child made adequate academic progress. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all you have to certify. And then from, actually you can skip 4th grade because that can be your other year. So starting 5th grade through 8th grade, you only have to test every other year, and you can do the narrative in the off years. And then you don't have to test every year until 9th grade. And if you look at my articles, I explain a little bit more, but you can even stop reporting once they reach the upper limit of compulsory education. So you could stop reporting at age 16 and not have to worry about all the cumulative requirements and all that. So you can be very loose with some of that. And maybe Mike wants to talk a little bit more about how you guys handle the requirements.
Pretty similarly, we usually worked from the IHIP, you know, in the beginning of the year. I mean, the IHIP is a plan. You're not bound to do everything you say you're going to do in the IHIP.
Mm-hmm.
You know, plans never survive contact with reality, right?
Right.
So, you know, we would have the IHIP, and my wife did most of the paperwork and saved me from it. But it was generally the trap people get into is thinking they have to send a lot more than they do. And you know what Kathy said about my student has made sufficient academic progress. Boom, that's it, done. The testing is, New York is pretty reasonable about it, and at least in some ways. There's a good sized list of options for that. We usually did the California Achievement Test, in part because it's an untimed test.
And you can give it yourself.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that was one.
Yep.
That was another question I had: is the administration of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can administer that ourselves. Okay.
Right. And so the CAT was really easy because you could administer it yourself, and because it's not timed, so that made it easy to administer. And it not being timed makes it very popular with a lot of parents of special needs kids who, you know, have
Mm-hmm.
may have trouble with the time test.
Just a couple things that you covered kind of in the last section that that might relate to California listeners. So both of our kids, we didn't realize it at first, but they both have dyslexia. So that was part of the journey of moving into homeschool, is struggling to learn how to read and overcoming that, and now both being successful at the university level. You know, it's really exciting to see that. I don't think that would have happened. They wouldn't have gotten what they needed in the public school setting. I just really don't think they would have. And I know that world really well. The other thing is, in California, it sounds like it's even easier to homeschool than in New York. Zero standardized testing is required. You can opt out all the way through. There's an affidavit you file every year, basically saying you're going to cover the basic topics, and then you take attendance. And you know, if they were to audit you, and that's pretty much it. You know, it's a massive state of 34 million people. I don't think there's going to be auditing taking place. They're overwhelmed anyway, especially these days.
Yeah.
And then I think for me, it was, being a California public educator, following the California curriculum for so many years, I thought, well, that's kind of what you needed to do. That's what everybody had to do. And then we started on this homeschool journey. I realized in New York, they're not following the California state curriculum, and they're educated people. I know it sounds basic. It sounds really goofy, but I just realized it's not just the California state curriculum that creates educated individuals. There's all kinds of ways you can learn. So a big part of our curriculum was books, and just reading really good books and spending hours and hours every day just reading really rich literature out loud. You know, the kids reading it on their own. Our son did books on tape because that worked better with dyslexia. He just, ate up books on tape, just all day listening to those as he was kind of working on his projects. So
the other thing to remember too is that, especially when you're talking about special needs, that special needs runs the gamut. It's everything from gifted child to a child with educational difficulties, or what they call the twice exceptional, which is a gifted child with a, you know, moderate to severe disability on top of it. So those also give you a whole bunch more alternatives. And just about every state out there also allows you to get access to services through your school department because you're paying for that with your taxes. But one of the nice things about that is if you then get some of those services, then that gets you then some of those alternate pathways in terms of testing options, not having to do certain tests, and things like that. So I just
Okay, that's good to know too. Thank you.
what you want to do is get what's called a neuropsych evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
That's anything above just a pediatrician giving you a basic diagnosis, but that's going to cover the gamut from speech and language issues to, you know, more advanced issues like you know, autistic spectrum and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll give you really the full gamut, and also, you know, if there are learning discrepancies, it will also help you on the IQ path as well. So that test you have to do through your health insurance, and again, quite a few states, you know, will require that in order to get certain types of services or certain higher level modifications. Just because it's not like, oh, I think my kid has this, but that test, you know, any pediatrician can get you set up with that, but it's through typically a psychiatrist or a neurologist or somebody who specializes in that area.
Yeah. Kind of switching topics here. I noticed a lot of you have maker backgrounds, which is pretty cool. So how do you feel like that has guided your instruction or non-instruction, whatever it may be? How do you feel that it benefits your homeschooling experience?
Who wants to go first? Because I maybe I'll have.
You spoke first. You go.
Sure. All right. So our homeschool philosophy, by the way, has been kind of, you know, life is homeschool, right? So we've incorporated some text learning, some curriculum, but a lot of it is just life experience. We travel around the country with the kids. We've done, you know, cooking. We've done homesteading in terms of farming with chickens and huge gardens, built tree forts in the chicken coop, carpentry. So that kind of gets to the maker side of things, where our kids have been involved in STEM activities since they could hold a soldering iron or, you know, cut things, make circuits. And we've encouraged that because both my wife and I went to RPI. We have that kind of background. And then there's just so much there for the taking that is instant lessons and schooling and experience. You can do everything. So, you know, Zero to Maker, by the way, is a really, really excellent resource. There's a few other things like that. I'm sure Kathy's got a short list. But if you know, you could almost design your entire homeschool curriculum just around, I think, the maker world, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. And I'll jump in and go a second, I guess, if you don't mind, Rick. I've got the same RPI connection. My wife and I both went to RPI, and I'm not tied into the maker ecosphere as much as I used to be, I guess, in some ways, because I was involved in starting the makerspace in Troy, and have been involved in this kind of thing. And it was very much, you know, what Todd said. You know, I've always said that if there's one thing I think was an absolute success about our homeschooling is we've raised two young men who believe they can learn anything. And, you know, learning is just something that happens. It's something that people do. It's natural. It doesn't happen in a specific time or a specific place. And everything was a learning opportunity when the boys were growing up. And people sometimes worry about, you know, going kind of back to the reporting. People get wrapped around the axle about, you know, the state says you have to have so many hours of education. We got a lot of those hours of education driving around in the car and learning about what we were looking at and looking at history, and just everything everywhere is a chance to learn. So yeah, very, very much the maker attitude that you can do it, you know, really informed what we did.
Yeah, I like what Mike said about, I think when you're homeschooling, you just have a lot broader view of what education is. And, you know, it's not just what's taking place in school, but it's like kind of life. Life is learning and, you know, being educated. So, you know, as far as the whole maker thing, you know, we went to the first Maker Faire when the kids were 4 and 7. So they really grew up with Maker Faire. And it was like, it was just this whole world where they realized we've just kind of discovered our people. You know, these are just like creative people that make just for the fun of making. There's no commercial purpose. It's not for making money. It's just for the sheer delight of making things. And like Mike said, just for the kids to realize that they can really make anything. If they can dream it up, they can make it, and not being hindered by anything. They didn't get into the engineering and the electronics and robotics quite as much as I thought they might, but my daughter's really into textiles. Doing tons of super amazing thing with textiles. And even, you know, as she's taken online classes, she's got a quilt going. You know, she's always got some project, you know, like my wife's into textiles also. And my son, really confident at woodworking, working with mechanics, you know, motors, bikes, things like that. And then also I took a semester off. I took a semester leave of absence, and we hit the road for 4.5 months. And we actually leased a car over in Europe, and we traveled around Europe for 4.5 months as a family, camping. We did something called couch surfing, where we actually stayed with families, local families that hosted us. So over 40 families in Greater Europe and even in Morocco hosted our family because they wanted to have a cultural exchange with an American family. And it was this 4.5 months where we were living in this, you know, Peugeot station wagon, traveling all over Europe. And it was, I mean, just an unbelievable, you know, learning experience that we'll remember forever. And just the flexibility that you get with homeschooling is really amazing. So those are just a couple things I thought of.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to put out there is that our kids got really tired of us basically, you know, they ask us a question, right? And like, oh, how does it work? Or what is this? And we're like, oh, grab the TV remote, or, you know, grab YouTube or whatever. And there's a lesson on it, a project on it, an instructional video. But the kids got really good at doing projects, fixing things, learning about stuff. And again, it's that teachable moment. It's about getting into sort of like the pattern of, okay, you know, this is what we need. And you know, the kids have become excellent debaters. It stresses parents out because everything is a drawn out argument, but it's like they make charts sometimes, like, you know, graphics, like, all right, here's my point. I'm like, yeah, you're 14. I'm the adult. Like, stop. But like, we raise them that way to be critical thinkers. So, you know, those are good things, but that you can find that teachable moment, and we all kind of joke about it as homeschoolers, but like there's such a rich variety of things out there that can become that you don't have to stress out about curriculum. Like probably the first few years, honestly, my wife was like literally pulling out hair, right? And I was stressed out and we were worried about it until we finally kind of had this epiphany of like, we don't need really any of that. We kept a few things like Story of the World, and like the math curriculum worked really well for the kids. So we used that for 3 out of the 4 kids. But otherwise, we're just like, you know, the cookbook, soldering, you know, all these maker books out there, or just, you know, YouTube. I've got a kid who's in a trade school that's doing welding and other cool things like that. And he taught himself guitar. There's surprises one day, hey, I'm playing guitar. Like, oh, wow, when did that happen? He'd been watching YouTube in his room and learning guitar.
Yeah.
They get that bug for doing those things. You know, the 14-year-old asked for a vinyl cutter for Christmas, sort of thing. You know, you know. I
love it. Well, you know, Todd, you know, my public school kids, they just want me to give them the answer. And I just don't do that. I don't give them the answer right away. You know, I let them, they collaborate, they work with others. And then they feel so empowered when they figure it out themselves, you know. And I can sense when they're getting too frustrated, you know, I need to step in and guide. But, you know, it's really kids being able to kind of take charge of their own world and, you know, answer their own questions. So I can really relate to that. You know, my son taught himself guitar as well, you know, and the next thing I know, he's got a bass guitar and an acoustic guitar and an electric guitar, you know, and he's got a job, he's got money to buy, you know, to buy him himself. So, and also the time factor, I think it's wonderful with homeschooling is you're not competing with kind of that 7 or 8 hours of the school day, you know, and then trying to squeeze in all those extra things after school and on weekends. It's just, you know, it's just so easier to get the stuff in that the kids are really loving, you know, instead of the school. You know, my son, I think he was just bugged at how much time's wasted, you know, during the school day, you know, between the passing periods, you know, kind of all the nonsense going on at lunch, and, you know, just all the wasted time that it could be so much more efficient. He could get his, you know, his official lessons done in, you know, a couple hours at home, and then just have the rest of the day to just really explore, you know, the stuff that they want to explore. So
yeah, that was a huge thing when our oldest was kind of butting heads with his mom and decided, you know, and so we sat down and we talked about it, and he decided, you know, I'd like to try public school and see what it's like. So start of third grade, we made an agreement that we put him in the local public school, or in the Shen district. If you're from Albany, you know, that's one of the better districts around by reputation. Put him in Shen, and the agreement was he was going to stay there until the end of October, give it a fair shot, and then we'd talk about what we were going to do. After about 2 weeks, he was convinced that the only part of the day that was really good was the bus ride. Largely because he spent so much time waiting for 25 kids to get organized and do something. And people say, you know, how can you have enough time to homeschool? And I'm like, homeschooling is so much more efficient than trying to do things with a group of 25 kids. That's not going to be the problem. Trust me.
That's right. Definitely.
Yeah, you know, so our oldest daughters, when they were like 13, 14 time frame there, so just starting ninth grade or going into ninth grade equivalent, they started taking classes at the local community college, right? And because we taught that critical thinking, that how to learn, and also some autonomy and responsibility, they handled it like pros, honestly. One of the two girls, she ended up matriculating full time, I think at like 15, and ended up with an associate's degree with an advanced engineering badge on it. She did an independent research project in magna cum laude graduate. Then went to RPI went into RPI as a junior. So anybody knowing about transferring to RPI, transferring as a junior was pretty dang impressive. And then the other one, like I said, you know, she's at UNH doing well, but she, as a junior level in high school, so, you know, I really want the experience. We weren't really kind of cool about it, but then she did literally a presentation with pluses and minuses, and she really worked at this whole thing and impressed the heck out of us. And we're like, well, you put this much effort into it, you know, go ahead and do this. But, you know, she was able to do all the stuff on her own. And her number one comment, right, when she was done a week of public school at junior level in high school, was like, oh my God, I have to, like, you know, request a pass to go pee, all this wasted time, and nobody wants to be here. And that blew her mind, because, you know, in community college, everyone's paying to go there in essence. Everybody wants to be there. No one's being forced to go there. And she's like, it's a completely different experience. And she also realized that they got done 2 or 3 times as much in half the time than they do in the public school. There was just so much wasted time. And that number fact blew our mind too, of like, we got together any sort of required-ish work, we're going to call it, easily 2 to 3 hours a day, and that was it. Because you're not doing all that wasteful in between classes, lunch period, you know, all those other things. You just condense it, knock it out, and get it done. Get on with life.
Well, that's great. Thanks, everybody. Those are great perspectives. We're really looking forward to the flexibility. The one thing that I'm a little bit worried about is just, and I'm sure we'll get over this after a few weeks, but is the kids readjusting to it. You know, even coming from the Montessori school, which is a little bit less structured than the public school, but it's still a set curriculum that is presented to them, and you know, it's not totally self-guided, which is what we're going to be going for.
Mm-hmm.
Highly recommend deschooling for a few weeks. My wife will absolutely say that too. You will catch up on the time on weekends, evenings, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Deschool for a few weeks. It's a
Okay.
valuable thing. I thought it was 100% bunk. when my wife told me about what deschooling was, and nope, I'm a convert, right? I saw it and nope, it's an absolute thing. So look it up if you're not sure, if you're not really familiar with what that is, but it's a.
Yeah, I know my wife has mentioned it. So, so yeah, and having this the last 6 months as a kind of a ramp, an on-ramp too, it helps also. So
yeah, it's kind of weird. The remote learning thing has kind of been a stepping stone to that, I think, for some people who are
Definitely
now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that I think that the remote learning can't work in some ways, but like when the teachers only have a few weeks to prepare, I mean, it's not really fair.
I think most teachers are doing a lot better this fall. The
Yeah.
spring was really difficult where everybody was just thrown into it. I think everyone's doing a lot better. I know I am, and my colleagues are. But I think, like Mike said, I think education is fundamentally changed. It's going to be fundamentally changed after COVID, and a lot of people might be thinking that this homeschool thing is possible. There's ways to do that. There's going to be a lot more online options and, kids learning on their own, because some kids are really thriving. They're doing really, really well with this model. So I know we're close to running out of time, Kathy. I wanted to, things going, timing's okay?
We have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
So maybe you can each just go around and talk about why it worked for you, how you fit homeschooling into your life, I guess, in a minute.
That's far too short. I'm going to instead give the one piece of advice that I have found to be universal that I've given to everybody who's asked me about homeschooling. When you're doing it, if what you're doing works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, do something else.
Rick and Todd, do you have some last advice?
I don't know. Well said, Mike. I think, it's a wild journey. It's pretty outside the box, but it's a lot more doable than you might imagine. So
I'm going to say, don't stress about a clock on the wall and a set schedule. We have 4 kids with special needs. My wife and I both worked professional jobs throughout this. So 2 working parents were able to make homeschooling with 4 special needs kids work. Again, life is homeschool is life. And once we got over the fact that we could do this at night, on weekends, we would take a family trip for a month and drive up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And we can't do that with public school, right? That was how we did it. We got over the fact that we didn't have to have a schedule.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Thank you all for chatting. It's interesting to hear from the other side. And again, I have a ton of articles on kathystheory.com about decompression and all kinds of homeschool tips. So, and I'm putting more every day. So take a look at that. I wrote about homeschooling for many years, and I'm just updating my articles and putting them on my own website. So good luck, and go to the Facebook page and ask questions as well. There's a lot of good advice there.
Thanks. It's been great so far. So everything I've seen so far. So thank you all for your time, and nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Take care.